Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Desk to Data Center. This is episode, oh my gosh, I don't even know anymore. It'll be in the title. But today we're going to build our first virtual machine. It's going to be a Windows Server virtual machine. And we'll take you through all the steps just so you can kind of see how that goes. So stay tuned. All right, so here we are in our ESXi host. We stood up ESXi in the last video. We got our networks set up. Remember, these have no DHCP settings. So we'll have to statically assign all of our network interfaces as we deploy systems. Now, the first thing we need to do if we're going to build a virtual machine is, well, pretty much create and register a virtual machine. So we'll click this button. We're going to deploy a new virtual machine. We're going to hit next here. We'll call it WinServe1. That's cool, right? ESXi, that's cool. We'll select Windows as the guest OS family, and we'll be doing Server 2022. Wow, they have Server 2025 on here. That's neat. We can enable Windows virtualization-based security. That's sort of if it's a requirement for your environment or not, and how much security you want. There's a little bit more info here, you know, if you want to do that. Next, and then we'll select our storage. We're going to put it on our large data store of 1.82 terabytes. Next, and then we get to customize some settings. So this is where you kind of customize the virtual hardware. So, you know, we can do CPU. You can actually do this two different ways. So this is 2 CPU at 2 cores, 2 cores per socket. In the old days, this was the default and you didn't break this down into larger areas because a lot of stuff was like, well, you need to have this many cores versus this many sockets. Sometimes licensing was sockets v cores and cores v sockets. So you had to kind of decide that stuff. Then you got your RAM. You should probably do it in megabytes, but when you get into the big stuff, like you just do that and it's fine. This doesn't do the full nice rounding, but it's okay. Hard disk 1, we're going to do 100 gigs. That's 200. We're going to do 100. We're also going to make some changes here. Thick provision is good if you have really poor performing disks. Thin provision is just the smart way to go though, because what thin provisioning does is we've given it 100 gigs. The Windows install is not going to take up 100 gigs. So whatever storage isn't currently being used is still listed as free storage on our data stores. So in a sense, we're not eating up storage we're not using. Now we could use up that storage, which means we do need to monitor our data stores and watch how they grow over time. But thin provision is usually always the way to go. And then you do have monitoring on things like your SAN, or if it's a vSAN cluster, the vSAN data store, or if it's hyper-converged, again, it's the same thing. Same thing as vSAN, any hyper-converged. You want to monitor those data stores, but you're going to get space savings in those scenarios from things like deduplication and compression and all that kind of stuff. So we're thin provisioned. We're not going to limit IOPS. This is all good. We're going to keep moving on. This is fine. This is fine. And we're going to stick it in VLAN 30. That's going to be our fantastic little Windows network. Default for a video card. And then we're going to hit next and finish. And you might say, wait a minute. Oh, actually, I didn't do something right and we should change it. Let's go to our virtual machine here. And let's actions, edit settings. For your network adapter, don't use E1000. Use VMXNet 3. This is the nicest version. If for some reason, whatever you're deploying can't use VMXNet 3, then E1000 is where it is. But everything uses this and you get a lot of cool benefits when you have VMware tools installed as well. So now we've got our VM built. Well, how do we install Windows? There's a lot of different options here. We could use Pixie booting to give the Pixie server the MAC address of this system and say, hey, this is going to be a Windows box. Once it boots up, look for it on the network and grab it and Pixie boot it. We can do that from the switch level, or we can do that at a different server level. The other way is to just mount a CD. And the way to do that in this scenario is by putting the ISOs on the data store. This is how I like to do it. Put the ISOs on the data store and then mount them as a data store ISO device. So I've already uploaded it, but I'll show you how that works. So you go to your data stores. Obviously we use this one and we want to do data store browser. And I made a folder So if you click here, you can go create directory, blah, and it'll let you create a directory that you can then upload files into, right? As you can see, we already have a VM folder here. So there's our VMDK, there's our VSMD, and there's our VMX file. This is our configuration file for the virtual machine. So this will have a lot of text information about the CPU, the RAM, the network it's in, all that kind of cool stuff is in there. And then as you can see here in our ISOs, there is our Windows ISO in there. So let's go back to our virtual machine. We'll edit actions one more time. Or edit settings. We'll switch our CD to a data store ISO file. We'll go over here and select our ISO. We'll tell it to connect, right? And then on VM options, because I'm lazy, we are going to probably force a BIOS just for the sake of catching things quickly. So then we'll turn it on, and then this is our console screen, and there we go. So we want to, let's make sure we're in here, boot off of the SATA CD-ROM drive. And why doesn't it detect that? Interesting. Did it disconnect our CD? It did. It disconnected our ISO file. So now we need to send a Control-Alt-Delete. Guest OS and keys, bloop. And there we go. And now we're booting off of the ISO file that's on the data store, and we will be able to install, is this full screen? We'll get Windows Server installed. If you've ever installed Windows Desktop, Windows Server is pretty much the same thing. There's like 2 different options. It's really no big deal. You kind of click next, you hit install. We're going to go standard desktop experience. As you can see, this was last modified September 8th of 2022. And of course, your company should have a licensing agreement with Microsoft. We won't be actually licensing connecting this system, so it's not too big a deal. And then we will use all that space and I'll say, hey, we're going to erase everything. And then, you know, if it does ask for a license key, which honestly, if you're in an enterprise environment already, it shouldn't be asking for a license key. It should be getting that once it gets joined to the domain. We don't have a domain yet, so we don't have that. We don't have a KMS server, a key management server. So we won't be doing that. We don't have WSUS. We don't have SCCM. We're missing a lot of really robust, is probably the best word to use there, Windows features to do things like join a system to the domain and manage users and groups and manage DHCP and DNS and all those wonderful things. But we will add them. All right, and the install is done and it's going to reboot itself automatically, but we're going to click the button now. Boop. So as you can see, Windows is getting ready for its first time deployment install. There we go. The full screen's messing me up. And here we are. We're going to set our administrator password. I'm going to do something you shouldn't do and set it the same as our ESXi password. Because these things aren't on half the time anyway, so it's not a big deal. And there we are. We are in Windows. Now, since we're using the console still, we're going to need to scooch this down, apparently, so that we can send keys. Because we can't press this or it will do our main machine. So we want to send that directly to this. There we go. When we get logged in, we can bring this back up. Now, you shouldn't do too much work as the local administrator on a machine, but you should keep those passwords handy because sometimes the local administrator will save your butt if you need access to a Windows server that doesn't have networking but should have a domain, or got disconnected from the domain, which happens, things of that nature. And then we just kind of pop in here and we'll look, and we should just see our hard drive. It'll look like a 900 gig hard drive, and then there's the wonderful Windows ISO still mounted, which is fine for now. And then of course we don't have any networking, and then here's Server Manager, which is a way to manage roles and features in Windows Server. Stuff like if you want to do IIS for a web server, though I don't really know why anybody runs web servers on Windows anymore. File serving, DHCP, DNS, you can turn all of that on through here. You can even install Server Manager now on a local machine and connect systems to it so that you can manage them all from one place. And then next level to that is Azure Arc, which lets you connect your servers to Azure to a degree so that you can maintain and manage systems and services on those systems. We only really have one more thing I want to do, and that is to change the name of this to match our virtual machine. So we'll go in here, we'll click rename this PC, and we'll call it WinSRV1, WinServ1, and we'll hit next. It'll say, hey, I need to reboot to do that. No big deal. We'll restart later because really it's just going to get powered off anyway. And that's it for the basic Windows Server install. We're not doing any roles or features at this time, but this is probably going to become our domain controller. It might also become our template box. When you have a vCenter, you can do what's called templating. You can take an image like we just made, turn it into a template, and then what that will do is it will allow us to make multiple VMs without having to go through that whole Windows Server OS install step again. That'll all be done. We'll run a thing called sysprep. Sysprep will then clean the machine, make it look brand new, and then we'll be done. Anyway, that's the end of the episode. Nice, simple. We just built a VM. We uploaded an ISO to the data store so we could access it for server provisioning. We installed Windows Server 2022, and we changed the name of our Windows VM to WinServ1 so that it matches between VMware and Windows. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you like and subscribe to the video and turn on the little bell for notifications so that you get updated when I release the next video. And we'll see you in the next one.